Well, thank you for your time, Jeff, and welcome to Action Reloaded. The first question I'm going to ask you is the one you've probably asked many times a day. So, how did you first discover Kempo, and what drew you to this martial art specifically?
Yep, good question. I was attending the university in those years, and that's when I met Lou Angel, Hanchi Lou Angel, who's teaching Japanese Goju-Ryu. And so that was when I began my martial art training in 1978. And then when I graduated from college, he said, look, if you want to make martial arts your life, you should move to California and study Kempo from Ed Parker because he's really the best in the world. And back in the days of the early 60s, late 50s, there were very, very few martial arts schools in the United States. And so those very few guys, they all knew each other. And so Mr. Angel was able to write me a letter of recommendation to Ed Parker to switch over and to start studying Kempo. So I sold my car to pay for the moving van, and I went to stay with some friends out there. And a week later, after I arrived, was the big Ed Parker International Karate Championships, the IKC. So I thought, great, that'd be the great place to meet him. So I had my letter of recommendation. I went down to Long Beach, California in the summer of 1983. I found Ed Parker. I bowed to him and handed him this letter. And he was so thrilled to hear from his old friend, Lou Angel. He gave me his personal home phone number. He said, give me a couple of weeks to get done with this and call me and I'll get you started. And that was so I moved to California to study Kempo, and I got to Ed Parker because of Lou Angel.
That's amazing. So, it was just sort of like pay it forward, wasn't it?
Yeah, very much. No, I've been really, really incredibly fortunate to be able to train with two of the best martial artists in the world of our lifetimes. Both of them have transitioned to the other side now, of course. But it was my great fortune to be able to be exposed to both of those gentlemen.
What would set Kempo apart from other martial arts styles, like in terms of like techniques, principles, and philosophies?
Yep, great question, gigantic answer. So hold on. But it's a completely unique system of all systems of martial arts in the world today, and probably for many days to come. And that is because it's based strictly on science and physics and principles and application. And it holds respect where it's due for tradition, very, very much so. But you only take forward what is applicable today. So that was the motive of Ed Parker. And so he was the one that took these ancient fighting Chinese techniques and broke them down and redeveloped them in their physics and their principles and their application, and then began what later became known as American Kempo, which was the Americanization of the ancient art of Kempo. Is a Japanese word. Chuan Fa is the Chinese word for Kenpo. So it started in China long, long before Japanese martial arts, and moved from China somewhere around 1,200 years ago to Okinawa first. And that was because the tea trade came from China to Japan. And so came the families with money, and so came their bodyguards. And that's how martial arts made it from China to Japan, starting in Okinawa and then moved through. From Japan, it then went to Hawaii, which is where Ed Parker started to learn it. And then in 1954, he was the one that brought it from Hawaii to the mainland United States.
So it's made quite the journey, hasn't it? From
Yes,
the
yes.
depths of Asia over to the Western culture.
Right, right. Big transition. But see, in my opinion, this is why when I refer to Ed Parker, I call him the Einstein of martial arts, because he was the one who was so brilliant that he could figure out how to, when a whole group of people look at something, but there's one person that sees something that no one else sees, That's what makes them brilliant. That's what makes them a genius. And that's what he did. Now we have taken it further with this fifth evolution of Kempo we call Kempo 5.0. Yes, that's true. And we've taken the physics and the principles even further, but we did not create them because he was the creator of that kind of thinking. That's why he deserves the credit of being the true innovator of American Kempo, and that's who we look to for Kempo 5.0, of course.
So would you say that the martial art of Kempo would be very effective and practical in terms of self-defense?
Yes, I think this is that the part that makes it stand alone on its own is because of its origin of the science and physics of motion and the geometry of impact. That's what makes it so applicable. Now, we are the ones that took that, and we're the ones that brought Kempo to the ground. So we took those very same principles and concepts that he used brilliantly for stand-up defense, and we're the ones that then learned Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, MMA, and incorporated that into the system. So there really was no ground fighting in Kempo before we did what we did. But it was also, and this is really important, the mandate directly from Ed Parker that Kempo should continue to evolve and change so it won't become obsolete. That was his mandate to all of his black belts. So we took that seriously and understood that once the Gracie family in 91 came to the United States and then the Machado family, that just turned the whole martial art world upside down. You would be hard pressed to find somebody more grateful for that, for the Gracie and Machado family to do what they did than me or us, my group, because that's the catalyst that caused us to evolve and change the art, which now we have franchise schools in 21 countries and we're the largest Kempo organization in history. And it's because of the evolution.
How would you say that the Kempo has evolved and adapted like over time within the martial arts community?
Each one of the Ed Parker black belts had access to him and the brilliance of who he was. Then it's up to us to take it forward. So different black belts have had different versions, if you will, different emphasis of different areas of Kempo. We are really the only ones that decided to make Kempo work on the ground, which has made us very, very unique. That's the good news. The bad news is, in order for us to be successful at that, we had to change the art of Kempo a lot. Not a little bit, but a lot. You had to open your mind and open your spirit to be able to receive this information and actually to be able to do something with it. So in doing that, we became sort of this weird group of Kempo guys that went in a crazy direction. And the crazy thing to me is nobody else did it. So I'm sitting there wondering why no one else took the Ed Parker famous quotes and took them seriously and went forward with evolving and changing the art. Now, the truth is, it took us well over 10 years to develop the art to be able to be used on the ground and to be used effectively. So this was no day at the beach. This was many, many years of a lot of hard work. And many of my students who already were wrestlers and grapplers and jiu-jitsu guys, they embraced it. I had to learn it. And then we worked together as a team to create the solutions for how to do your Kempo on your back. Then as the years went on, now that was 2005 when we switched over to Kempo 5.0. And we've continued to evolve since then. And in that journey, many other Kempo guys who left Kempo because there was no ground system, who went into jiu-jitsu, have left there and come back to Kempo because of what we've done. Because they understood and they knew that if you guys don't change and evolve, you're going to be sitting on the couch eating potato chips talking about the old days. And we decided not to do that. So as those other Kempo guys came back to Kempo. And as our group continued to evolve, we in turn evolved the art of Kempo 5.0 again. So technically, we teach Kempo 5.0.2.
And for people that are like watching, listening, and are interested in Campo, what would you say would be like a valuable lesson, or like what can students take away from studying Campo?
Well, what I hope, now there are huge differences in different types of Kempo. There always were differences, of course, but now they're gigantic. So the one thing I would love for people to get from Kempo in general is to switch how they think, change and think about science and physics and logic and application, real street application. And the second thing is, don't be afraid to evolve and to change and to question authority, as long as you do it respectfully. And that natural evolution of where we were and where we are now is exactly what Kempo Karate is supposed to be. One of the most famous quotes from Ed Parker is, "When I'm gone, I hope no one traditionalizes my art." Well, almost everyone did, which is kind of nutty to me, but that's their choice. When we first changed over in 2005, as you can imagine, I took a lot of heat from everybody around the world. But I just kept saying, we got to figure this out, guys. We have got to do this. Otherwise, Kempo is just going to drop like a rock and everybody else is going to be doing great. And we're going to be sitting there holding the bag. So we decided to go it on alone. And then in a fairly short time, a few years, we finally started getting the respect from the rest of the Kempo community and the rest of the martial art community. And it's been a meteoric rise up ever since then.
That's amazing, isn't it? The way
It is.
you could have let the martial arts sink like a rock, or throw that raft out and save it. And
Yes.
look at it now, you've evolved it. And if I'm correct, it's your schools around the world, and especially the one in Vegas, are very popular. And
Yes.
I'm safe to say that you would not be like, what would you call it? You wouldn't have practitioners sort of being like, ah, no, we're going to drop out here. I'd say your numbers are ever increasing.
Yes. We are. We've been on a steady trajectory upward for ever since we started it. I actually was prepared back in 2005. I figured, well, I'm going to lose at least 20% of my student base just because they won't want to change for whatever reason. And the opposite of that happened. Everybody stayed, everybody was supportive, everybody was thrilled. And then we've just grown from there because, and I think the reason why is because it's so incredibly obvious that we need to adapt and change and grow, or else we're going to become obsolete, as Ed Parker pointed out. Another famous quote from him, which fits right here quite well, is, "The ignorant refuse to study and the intelligent never stop." A real martial artist pursues change. He's not afraid of it. So, I agree with that completely. And that's all we did, was continue to evolve and change and grow. And where a lot of, look at it this way. Let's say a 17-year-old kid goes into a Kempo karate school and goes, "Wow, this stuff is great. How do you guys fight in the ground?" And they go, "Well, we don't do that." And they'll say, "Okay, thank you. Goodbye."
Yeah.
They're if you're not fighting on the ground, they're not going to stay there. So now the discussion we can have is whether you think our groundwork in Kempo is any good or not, or any of that. That's great. We can have that conversation. The one that we just can't have is whether we should or should not be fighting on the ground. The answer is yes, we absolutely need to be doing that. And I hope other people follow suit. Of course, they're welcome to come over and join us if they wish, but a lot of people just can't bring themselves to do that for whatever reason. Once again, is beyond my intellect. But I do hope that the rest of the Kempo world does jump on and continue to do the mandate from Ed Parker to evolve and change and grow.
And you've been doing Campo for many, many years. Can you share any memorable experiences or moments from either teaching or training that have had like a lasting impact on you?
Oh man, that's a long list. The answer is yes. This is my 45th year of Kempo. So, the best day, you can probably imagine what it was like being on the movie set of The Perfect Weapon. Ed Parker was alive. He was with me every day and night. When we were doing fight scenes, it'd be 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. He'd be right there at my side. We became very, very close. I choreographed, or he and I both choreographed the fight scenes for the movies. So what I would do is I would take my pad of paper, and go over to his house and just sketch and make notes. And as the script was written and developed, I would say, okay, here's the environment. It's an apartment, or it's a gym, or it's a street, or it's a whatever. And what would you like in the environment, so that we could use to show our tempo? So we were actually in control of all of that. And then I got final edit and sound check from Paramount. Now, if you think about that, that's nuts, because not only do they not give that to any actor, this was my first movie. So the fact that a company as big as Paramount would surrender that right to me was completely unheard of. But let's be clear, the reason they did that is because they knew I'm really the only one that knew what this stuff was supposed to look like. So when I first saw the edited fight scenes of the movie, I contacted the producer. I said, why is this here? This doesn't belong there. This should go here, and that goes next, and blah, blah, blah. And that's when he turned and said, okay, then why don't you come in and do it? And I said, great. I'd never been in an editing bay before, nothing. So I walked in and sat down, and the end result is, because of the work I did, the fight scenes were elongated. They were longer, because I knew this goes there, that goes here. And so that's important, because the most expensive thing you're doing in one of these movies are the fight scenes. They take forever to shoot for seconds on film, right?
Yeah.
20 seconds on film could be a 12-hour day, easy. So when you think about the expense of it, then you go, okay, if I can get 3 more seconds on film of a fight scene, that's money back on the screen for me. So it worked. I made them more money by putting that stuff back up on the screen. And for us, I was able to tell the story of Kempo. This is who we are, and this is what we do.
Well, you've kind of led me on to The Perfect Weapon. You made that
Yes.
transition awesome. So it's considered like one of your most iconic films. What initially attracted you to the script and character?
Yes. There were many amazing things during that time of my life. So I had been studying acting for 5 years previously to that, got little jobs as an actor here and there. I never told anybody I knew martial arts, because I didn't want to wind up doing just a schlock martial art movie like so many others. I wanted what I wanted. And so I knew if I ever got my chance to do an audition or a screen test or something for a studio, I'd better be ready. Because even if you get your break and you're not ready, you're not going anywhere. So I studied acting 5 years, so that if I ever got my break, I'd be able to deliver. So that's what happened. The producer I signed with, I got to him because in the acting workshop that I was a part of in Los Angeles, the guy that worked there teaching acting, ironically, was the guy that wrote Van Damme's second movie, Kickboxer. And we kind of became friends. And I said, we'd been friends for months. And then I found out he wrote Kickboxer. I said, wow, that's amazing. I actually do this thing called Kempo. And he was, oh, that's amazing. So he came down to watch one night. And after that, that was it. He went back to the producer of Van Damme's first 3 movies, Mark DeSalle, and he said, I got the next one. You've got to see this Kempo stuff. You won't believe it. And it took him several times, but he finally got him to come down to the karate school and for us to do a demo. And after that, he was like, okay. He signed me for 4 pictures right there. And then he was the one that got it into Paramount. So when Paramount took the Speakman deal, it came with this producer. The 4 of us were tied on all 4 movies. The first one was called The Perfect Weapon. They wrote it for me. So I was able to interact with the writer during it. So all that stuff you see in the movie, in the dojo, all of those things, that's all stuff I contributed. The Tiger and the Dragon and all of that, those were my contributions. I didn't write any of it, but I worked with the writer on a regular basis. And then when it came to the fight scenes, they were able to give us complete control of that, which I'm not even sure today how that happened, but it did happen. And then that was the beginning. And the problem, and then you would think, okay, Paramount did The Perfect Weapon, the first of 4 movies. What the heck happened to the other 3? And that's a sad story because they had such a problematic time working with the producer that I was tied to. They never wanted to do another movie with him.
Oh,
So that meant they were just going to put me on a shelf and let my time elapse, and then it was over. And that's exactly what happened. Now I had an option with him. He had an option with me to do those 3 movies outside of Paramount if they didn't take the next movies, which they didn't. So now I'm legally tied to him, and that's how I got some of the other movies done. But as I'm sure you noticed, as everybody else did, the quality of the movies was nowhere near Perfect Weapon. That's why that's the one that stands out. We had all the money you would want. When you're working for a studio, it's a radically different experience than when you're working for an independent film company. So when you have all that money, it buys you time, cameras, crew, lighting, all the stuff that comes with the money. So that's why the fight scenes in Perfect Weapon really stand out.
But then you didn't really phone in the rest of your performances, so they still, you know,
Right.
you can't be accused of that.
Yeah, no. And the truth is, every time now, even though the budgets for the rest of the movies were approximately 1/3 of the budgets we had for Perfect Weapon, when it was time to show up for work, I showed up for work. You know, I didn't pull back, hold back. So we were limited. We didn't have 3 days to shoot a fight scene. We had 1 day. Okay, so we got to work harder. We got to be smarter. And you still have to deliver, because nobody is going to look at the next movie and go, well, okay, it was only 1/3 the budget, so let's forgive this and forgive that. They're not going to do that. So you still have to deliver. You have to perform. But Perfect Weapon was magic. There was nothing. You can just imagine what it was like. The first movie, the biggest production company in the world at that time, and I think still is today. They had $1 billion in cash in the bank in 1995. I mean, that's an insane amount of money.
Yeah.
And so you're working with the A-team. And actually, Paramount is the only studio that has worldwide distribution. All the other studios, they sell Germany, they sell Italy, they sell to other distribution companies. Not Paramount. They distribute worldwide. That's why everywhere in the world you go, the name of the movie is The Perfect Weapon. When you look at other movies, it could be named something in the United States, something different in Germany, something different in Australia. But you don't when you work with Paramount, because they're the only company that owns their own company all around the world. So it was an amazing time, And then, as I'm sure you know, Mr. Parker died right after we were done filming Perfect Weapon. So he never got to see the movie. We finished filming at the end of November. He was going back to Hawaii to see his 94-year-old mother. And as soon as he landed on Hawaiian soil at the airport, he dropped dead of a heart attack at age 59.
Jesus.
59. It was so shocking and so tragic. And just think, the one thing that he wanted to do in his life that he never accomplished was to take his art to the world through film. That was the only thing. And here it is. And now it all got done exactly the way he wanted it, from the biggest production company in the world. And then he just left us like that. And that's the reason why I have not watched The Perfect Weapon since it was released in March of 91. I just can't watch it. It's just too, it's like, that's the past. I've got to get that out of my life, because the painfulness of losing somebody I was that close to, that was so much a part of everything, is just too much to deal with.
So, like your most iconic film, um, you really just can't go back and watch just because of the stigma around it, so to speak.
Yes, yeah, that's quite accurate. Yeah.
Okay,
It's the it's a weird combination of emotion. Yes, it's very based in emotion, but it also is a little bit of, that's the past now,
yeah.
because he's gone. So let's let it be the past. Let's move on. We have to continue to live our lives. We have to do whatever it is that's coming next. So it was a bit more than just emotion. It was like, I have to put that behind me and I have to try to move on. And if I'm always looking over my shoulder, I'm not going to be able to move forward.
I've always wondered, in The Perfect Weapon, when your character is about to get robbed and he has to hand over his wallet.
Yeah.
Does that work in real life?
Well, I'll tell you a funny story about that particular scene. We call it the wallet scene. So when you're done filming a movie, you're done. If you're going to go back after you're done filming and film more footage, that's very expensive. No, almost nobody does that because it's so expensive. You got to hire the same crew, the same everything, and get back on the horse and ride it again. But Paramount wanted to do that. And it's because all of the other fight scenes in the movie were edited sort of very choppy like. There were many, many edits in one fight scene. And that's because Mark DeSalle, his three previous movies were with Jean-Claude Van Damme. So, I mean, he's extremely limited in his martial art abilities. He's a very talented, incredible athlete, but he doesn't have much depth or much range in his martial arts skill. A jump spinning kick, a reverse kick, So what you wind up doing is you shoot that one move 5 different times, and then you edit it 5 different ways to try to elongate the fight scene. Well, it's the opposite in Kempo. There's way too much material. There's like an embarrassment of riches here. So when DeSalle was done with the movie and turned it into Paramount, they wanted one fight scene that didn't have so many edits in it. So instead of re-editing it, they said, let's shoot another fight scene. So they created the alley scene, wallet scene in the alley. And DeSalle was nowhere around. We shot it ourselves. I edited it myself. And it's so interesting you brought that up, because what I have learned over the years is martial artists like that scene in the movie the best, as opposed to the scene that's in the Taekwondo gym, which is the big set piece fight scene, right? It's this huge thing. That took us 3 days, by the way, to film that. 3 12-hour days to film that one fight scene. And think that lasts, what does it last, 2 minutes? And it
You
took
wouldn't get that
3 days,
these
three
days.
12-hour days. It's crazy. So, but the other one we just shot in like half a day. So when you just talk to the public, they usually like that Taekwondo fight scene the best in the gym. But when you talk to martial artists, they like the wallet fight scene because it was more realistic. It's just real quick, one hit, two, turn around, turn the bam, 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 and it was done. And that's going to be a much more realistic portrayal of what happens in the street. You're not going to have this long project. You kick somebody in the head and they turn around, they come back, and again, kick them in the head and they come back. They're not going to come back. So, but that was a real interesting. It was shocking for me when I got the call from Paramount that they wanted to add a fight scene. I mean, I would never have thought that because nobody does that. But it's so funny that you brought up that particular scene.
It would, yeah, I was going to say it would be one of my favorite scenes from the movie. It's just short and sweet, but it's so
Yep.
brutal at the same time. You're like, oh shit, would that work? Would that work?
Yeah. Yeah.
And he's
Tempo
like,
is an extremely practical street art, and it lost that standing after the Gracie family came here in 1991. and brought their type of Brazilian jiu-jitsu, which morphed into this thing we have that's called MMA today. And if you don't know how to fight on the ground, it doesn't matter how good you are stand-up fighter, because the one thing that all those MMA jiu-jitsu guys know is eventually they'll get you on the ground. And once they get you down there, if you don't know what you're doing, it's over. So you'd better know what you're doing once you get down there. Now, a lot of Kempo guys who don't do what we did, they say, oh, they would never get me to the ground. I poke them in the eye, you know. Okay, maybe, probably not. But that's the wrong conversation. The conversation you want to have is, if we go to the ground, am I prepared?
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, then you'd better get ready. You've got to assume that you're going to the ground, especially, this is 2023. How many people know jiu-jitsu and MMA today? It's an enormous amount. And if you're not ready for it, you're not going to have a good day.